This video is sponsored by Thinkific, all-in-one online course hosting platform. Unlike a short promo video or a single YouTube episode, the way you approach the editing of an online course can have long-term implications. Since you're dealing with a few or even dozens of hours of delivery footage, the workflow can really make a difference. Not only in speed, but also in reusability and potential future versioning. So in this video, we'll have a look at my process one step at a time, and we'll use the Editing Chef, an online course I launched a week ago, to showcase all of it. We'll start with asset management, and we'll continue with creating a Premiere Pro production, camera synchronization, assembly of the first cut, basic audio refinement, color correction, and applying motion graphic elements and music. By the end of this video, we'll talk about the course a little bit more, but if you want to check it right away, you can just click a link in the description or check a promo video over here. Enrollment is time limited, so seriously, don't wait. Let me be clear, my process, my workflow evolves because each project may require a little bit different approach due to its specification. And while most of the steps will look pretty much the same for every course editing gig, the nuances will differ, and that's something to be expected. Also, it's not gonna be an in-depth tutorial. Rather than that, it's a walkthrough of the steps I take from the moment I get the footage to the moment the course is ready for the first students. Okay, that's off my chest, let's do it. I offloaded the footage to my NAS, which is set to RAID 5, and it gives me some extra redundancy in case something goes wrong. I also have an offsite copy on a dedicated hard drive. I open Kino and start with batch renaming. I like having a naming convention that uses recording device and color profile information. The second is especially useful when I color correct the footage. We'll get to it in a moment. I will add camera information, descriptions, and batch tag the clips. For B-roll clips, I will also add some individual tags. You may wonder, why would I waste my time on this? That's because I treat it as an investment into searchability and cleaner workflow in the future. By the way, all of the students who will enroll in the Editing Chef in this release will get Kino Premium for 6 months. That's an exclusive bonus you wouldn't get anywhere else. A regular price is $349 and you can even win this lifetime copy. All of the details on the website. I decided to use a new productions workflow for this project because I think it works really well for online courses. If you've never used productions in Premiere Pro, watch my video playlist about this feature. My reasoning behind it is that courses usually consist of a lot of lessons, a lot of individual videos, individual sequences. Plus, in case of the Editing Chef, I want to grow this course over time. It's good to have it all in one bucket, and I don't want to overload a singular traditional Premiere Pro project, which could make it slow and potentially less stable. Also, I keep referencing some of the clips in multiple lessons. So productions give us that new paradigm of referencing clips across multiple projects within it. As I say in the Bulletproof Premiere Pro, stability is all about good practices. Once I imported all the files, it's time to interpret the footage. Generally, interpreting the footage or conforming the footage means that we modify it so that it's consistent across the project. It means modifying a frame rate, audio channels mapping, aspect ratio, etc. Whenever I'm working with two camera angles, I like to link the clips once they're synchronized. What are the benefits? Well, it acts as a single clip, which I will show you in a moment. It's basically the least complicated method of dealing with synchronized camera footage. But for linking to work, all audio clips need to have the same number of channels. The external recorder I used captured audio to mono tracks, which is usually good for dialogue, but I decided to convert it to stereo. Alternatively, I could modify camera audio to mono, which would also work. Eventually, it wouldn't really make any difference for this project. I synchronized camera angles manually. You might think that's inefficient, but in my opinion, it's not the case. First of all, there aren't that many clips because we recorded a few lessons in one go. Secondly, at this stage I also do a cleanup, which would take me extra time anyway, even if I were to use Plural Eyes from Red Giant. And Adobe's audio synchronization doesn't make sense at all, because for long clips like this, it takes longer to sync them automatically than I'm able to do it manually. So once I sync clips, I will also link them, trim head and tail, and disable not needed audio clips and second camera angle. You may wonder why the sync isn't perfect here. I find that the half frame off sync is not really a problem. Since visual information takes a bit longer to process than audio for your brain, it's actually even better if the sync is not perfect and the audio comes a fraction of a frame later than the video part. It is a bit controversial, to be honest, but I dare to say it works. At this stage, I will also rename tracks and change their layout so that the track names are always visible, even when minimized. Now it's time to apply audio effects to the tracks instead of individual clips. With this approach, the effects will be applied to all sequences I create based on this one. And since we're about to duplicate them in a moment, I think that doing it at this stage is really beneficial. So I apply a parametric equalizer, multiband compressor, and de-esser effects to make the sound the way I want. And I'm pretty much done with working on the audio for this project. Become too lazy and won't have to refocus from time to time. Next one, color correction. I'm using a nitrate plugin from Film Convert, which is one of the very few plugins I consistently use in my workflow. I find it easier to use than Lumetri Color, but more importantly, I like the results I'm able to achieve much better. This is also when having a color profile information in a clip's name comes in handy. Nitrate uses a camera and color profile to correctly interpret color information, and you're able to get good results very fast. In this case, my main camera was Panasonic S1H recording in Cine 2 profile, and my B-cam was my Blackmagic Pocket 4K, which recorded to film color profile. To match the two cameras, I'm using Parade Scope in a comparison view. I'm also using a vector scope to monitor skin tones. At this stage, I will also create presets for shot framing for both cameras. I used guides to make sure that my face stays pretty much in the same spot when I'm cutting to a cropped frame of the main camera. For the B-cam shot, the framing will be off-center, but that's actually what I intended. I use these clips for insert moments. Not when I'm speaking directly to a student, but rather when I introduce additional information or go off topic. I created two B-cam framings that have a bit of a different feeling. The wider one is more as a matter of fact, while the tighter one is more off-center and works great for these by-the-way types inserts. Sometimes I'm using an adjustment layer with the transform effect to change the framing, but for this project I reframed more than every other clip on the timeline, so to keep things clean, I went with motion parameter presets. Also, I knew there wouldn't be any changes to framing later. Here is another project where I used this adjustment layer approach. It lets you copy the framing settings very quickly, and you can have a visual representation to where framing has been adjusted. And actually, I did use this approach a little bit in the editing chef when I was using essential motion presets to dynamically zoom in the frame. I described this methodology quite extensively in the essential motion introduction video. And only now is the time to duplicate the sequence and split it into separate video lessons. I know it's a lot of duplicating and renaming, but I find this workflow to be the cleanest. I wanted to have final delivery files in 1080p, and I actually made a mistake here. I should have changed the sequence settings earlier for the sequence with all the lessons inside. But I realized I forgot to do it once I already had sequences for each lesson. I had to change the resolution manually for each of them. Still, it only took me a few minutes. And set to frame size is a command I have mapped to a shortcut on my keyboard, so when I was editing assemblies, I just selected the clips and hit the button. By the way, I used Airtable to organize and plan the lessons. Next to the names and notes about a given lesson, I also had a column for a duration, an action step for a given lesson, and so on, just to have it all in one place. Once we have divided the footage into separate videos, it's time for the first pass, that is an assembly edit. I did a video where you can see me cutting an assembly in real time with my commentary for one of the lessons from the course. Generally, it's a process of throwing wrong takes away. I used shortcuts to make this process fast, and I usually playback the timeline at twice the speed because at this stage I don't need precision. The way the content is recorded will have a dramatic impact on the way the assembled edit will look like and how fast that process will be. Generally, it's best to record by sections. Once you have a given section in the camera, you can move on to the next one. If you keep doing more takes for some sections you recorded much earlier, the process will become a bit problematic and much slower. To be clear, at this stage I'm not applying any graphic elements. I'm not even changing camera angles or reframing the shots. It's just about having a clean take of the content for each video. Whenever I had doubts if I should include a certain moment in a video or not, I would color code the clip. For some videos, I also used gaps to indicate that there is a place where I will insert a subtitle card later. Once I was done with an assembly edit, I would duplicate the sequence again, rename it, and move it to the edits bin. Also, whenever I've had a funny moment that could be useful in the future, I would leave it on the timeline and color code it as well. The best example of that is a clip I ended up using for the closure of the promo video. This one. Let's do it. It was not intended to be a part of any video, but when you find such a moment on the timeline, you should store it in a separate location. Often, it will come in handy later. Next, B-roll selects. Here again, I'm just trimming clips down to usable parts. For the editing chef, I had very little B-roll footage. Eventually, I did use more B-roll clips in the lessons, but I haven't really planned for these shots. I was only deciding on what I needed when I was editing a production version, a final version. But for these, of course, I needed some motion graphic templates. I created mographs in After Effects. I love this way of working with motion graphics because you don't have to switch between programs, and dynamic links are really meant for animations that have to be readjusted and edited quite a few times, not for titles, annotations, and title cards. I created a sequence with motion graphics so that I can drag and drop them between sequences easily and quickly. You don't want to import a motion graphic template from Essential Graphics panel because every time you do it, Premiere Pro kind of extracts the motion graphic template file so that it can be edited in Premiere Pro. So it's better to do it once for each template and then rely on this motion graphic template sequence. So once I imported all of the templates, I adjusted them a bit and replaced them in the dedicated sequence. We are now ready to work on a production version, that is a final delivery video. At this point, I put all the ingredients together. I will also try to remove some of the annoying mouth clicks. Obviously, I adjust the pacing and trim heads and tails of the clips. If for some reason the pacing feels slow at any point, I would rather cut out a few frames than to have an uncomfortable pause. Unless it serves a specific purpose, of course. Now I'm also switching between camera angles or to a tighter framing. A trick here is to cut just before someone starts to speak. A cut usually works because of the movement and action. If we cut to a static shot, the viewer will recognize that it's not a continuous take. But if we cut to action instead, and eyes don't have to move much between the shots, subconsciously it will feel like a continuous take, even if it's obvious that a few frames or seconds have been removed from the middle. Sometimes though we have to deal with cuts where a person is blinking just before the end of the sentence. In such a scenario, I usually go with an L cut to the next line. If it's only a few frames, it won't be distracting for the viewer. That's also a moment when I apply motion graphics like title cards and annotations, as well as other graphic elements. Using mographs, adjusting and customizing the parameters listed in the template is just a pleasure. I also decided to use music beats for the video title card and for closure for each lesson. So when I was editing a production version of the first lesson, I created a production bin and project for music clips and prepared them to be reused in all of the lessons. I kept these music beats in the same sequence as motion graphic templates because there was no point in creating a new one just for 2 short music cues. I also used a whoosh sound effect to help with a transition for the outro music. It's a very useful trick that can help with music transitioning in many scenarios. And actually, let me talk about Premiere Pro Productions a bit more. I'm always trying to keep things clean and organized. But the truth is, sometimes you will just end up with a few files that aren't assigned to any specific bin or project. In my opinion, that's completely natural and you just need to find the time to clean it up at some point. For me, it was a case when I started adding screen grabs and additional B-roll clips for the final edits. So at some point, actually a few times, I would just spend a few minutes moving files between projects to keep things clean. I also ended up reorganizing my production a bit. There was a point at which it took 10 or 15 seconds to save the project with almost 100 of sequences. So I divided it into a few smaller projects for each main section of the course. Sometimes, when editing a final version, I needed to make a list of elements to prepare, like screen grabs, stock clips, additional footage I needed to record, etc. I used markers for that purpose and actually color-coded the notes as well, meaning that I used different marker colors for different types of content. A green marker for annotations I need to add, a pink one for screen grabs, an orange one for static graphic elements, etc. If there were a lot of such notes for a given lesson, I would print them out with the export markers feature. A tip here is to use markers descriptions instead of name, because for some reason only description is included in the export. I said it before and I will say it again, markers in Premiere Pro need complete makeover. The most time-consuming assets to prepare were screen recordings. I used OBS to record them, which I also use for all of my regular YouTube videos. I also needed to record some additional B-roll footage, which is always fun. And if there was something I wasn't able to record myself, I just used the ArtGrid library, where I was able to find everything I needed. And for the price you pay for their service, the quality of the footage is very good. Finally, it was time to export the videos. Obviously, I wanted a great quality, but at the same time, it's a video for internet usage. So I set it to H.264 with software encoding and 2-pass variable bitrate of 60 megabits and max of 25 megabits. The results were very satisfying, but for some reason I had a render glitch in a few files. Generally, it should not happen if you choose 2-pass export, but it did, which got me confused. So for these few videos, I just went with the constant bitrate setting of 20 megabits. Normally, I would recommend using a Q button and run export once you're done for a day. But on my machine, and with the codecs and workflow I used, each export took only a few minutes. So I would just use this time to take a short break. There was no feedback round because it's my own project, but if there were other parties involved, I would use Frame.io or Whipster to gather the notes. Be sure to set a number of feedback rounds with the client and iterate on making this process working well for both parties. Once the videos are exported, you need a place to host your online course. After doing some research, I went with Thinkific. Why did I use such a service? Because I needed to be sure that the viewing experience will be good for anyone in the world. I also didn't want to have to monitor any technical performance of the website, etc. With Thinkific, you can design a curriculum, add download files, customize a lot of parameters for the lessons, set multiple pricing options, welcome emails, set a drip schedule, design a landing page, etc. You also get features like progress reports, which help you to better serve your students. It's all built into the service and you don't have to worry about any blackouts, slow performance, etc. If you liked my workflow and want to learn more about the things I do to make my editing process efficient, as well as a whole gamut of things needed to build a habit of deep work in your editing bay, check out the Editing Chef. Enrollment is time limited. I will reopen it eventually, but the price will be probably higher. There are bonuses included for those who enroll early, so seriously, don't wait. It was Piotr, see you next time.